You know, this is something that Benching with Babish doesn't have to deal with. He doesn't have to deal with the winding down of his stove, so that way, as his stove is cooling down, you know, he can say, meanwhile, I'm going to prepare this remoulade for this delicious dish. Instead, I have to sit here and wait for this thing to spin down, you know, because it just takes forever. Still going. Still going. Take that, Andy. You don't have to deal with that.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome back to the channel, folks. Today, I'm headless. We're going to be doing the fingerboard. I wanted to have a nice fingerboard that fits the character of the rest of the guitar. This one has some quilting on it, much like the rest of the guitar and almost everything else that's going into it, just to continue with that visual appeal. A lot of places will sell you a fingerboard that's already pre-slotted, but you're limited, which is why I always make my own fret rules. This one is a 630 scale because this is going to be a 630 scale guitar, and it's marked out for the nut, the first 12 frets, and then 20 frets if you want it or not. But without further ado, let's change this table saw blade to the proper saw, because that's a bit high. So, when I was a little kid, I used to make my father turn off the power for this at the breaker because I was always scared that this would turn on and take off my hands. And after a while I realized that's probably a good thought, but at the same time, if you're not grabbing the blade while your hands are on this, you're not going to be in any danger. So I just take that out. I've got a carriage mounted right onto the side of my table saw that holds my most used blades. That way I never have to look for them. So this is my regular fret slot width, so it's 0.6 millimeters. This one was made custom for me by Peerless, just because I don't like the other saw blades that are out there. I feel like they make the slots a little bit too loose. You never want to drop this nut down into your table saw just because you'll never find it. I like to put my finger through here, feel the center, and then use these two fingers to start it. Or sometimes, depending on the blade, I go like this. And you want to make sure that this nut is cinched down properly, because if it's not, and you turn it on, the arbor, as it rotates, self-tightens into the nut, and I'll tell you, you will destroy the blade pulling it out. And I can tell you that from experience. Don't do that. So I'm just making sure this is tight, and then again, this is too tall. So, in order to fix that, I've done this a lot. What I do is I take my handy push stick and I just kind of rub it over here until it engages. When I saw into my fingerboard blade, I want it to be as close to the final depth as possible. I know I'm going to plane on the top side, I know I'm going to plane on the bottom side, but I don't want my fret slots overcut. I have my fence here, and I've already made sure that this is square to the blade, and then I use this one because I make my fret rules out of Paduke. This is for the Paduke rules, and so I'll set this up with the pin directly over the blade, so that way when I'm cutting, I mean, this doesn't matter really. For me, I really like the simplicity and direct knowledge that the pin is right above the blade, so that way I can see exactly where it is. Clamps. I just like to hold it tight here and here. Once this is on, I like to make sure that everything moves freely, and then I've got everything clear. So that means all this stuff gets hung up on your carrier. I've got a lot of junk hanging off of my table saw, but it makes things efficient. Even out one side, because we need one reference side. So I'm looking at the striping on this, trying to figure out which way I want it to go, because it's got a little bit of a curl, much like the rest of the guitar. So you have to think of, maybe this should be a good top side because the curl is going up this way, and it'll be visually interesting. And I think that's what I'm gonna do. So that means that this is gonna have to go down, and then I'm going to use the joiner to smooth up this face and this face only. So I'll be right back. Now that that is done with the joiner, I'm going to put this here and then get my scale lined up. I want to have a 20th fret, but I want to have a half fret. So I'm going to make sure that I mount this where I want it and then position in this direction, so that way I can start with the 20th fret here because I don't cut all the way through. And then I use my ever-present blue tape to hold it down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to cut through halfway and pull back, and then for all the other frets I'm going to go all the way across, remove the fingerboard, and then come down to the next one. You only want to make one pass, because if you go forwards and then backwards you end up getting an hourglass shaped fret slot, and that hourglass shaped fret slot means that the corners of the frets are more prone to popping up. A very common problem. I'm actually doing several refrets on guitars who have that problem currently. So I'm going to start here at 20 and I'm going to work my way down to what I call 0. As always, shop safety. Trust me, I'm wearing eyeglasses. So now I've got this cut. I take this opportunity to check. Did I get all my frets cut? Am I missing one? And then I also check along the edge here to make sure that everything looks good. And it does. So first things first, I take my handy pencil, which isn't making a grand entrance today, and I will write the scale right here, so that way I know exactly which scale this is. So now we're going to cut through here on the bandsaw. We're going to cut this off. We're going to use our sander to sand this flat, and then because we've introduced a lot of stress and heat, I'm going to use a little bit of super glue to size that up, so that way if there's any end checks in it, they're completely eliminated. So let's go over to the bandsaw and do that. So as you can see, I cut with the blade halfway through that slot, and that leaves only this much to clean up. So all I have to do is take this to my disc sander and sand it smooth. So now that this is nice and smooth, I'm gonna put a little bit of super glue over there, spread it with my finger. Before anybody mentions it, super glue was developed to fix people's hands. It was developed for our military, for basically field stitches. So I don't want to hear any of this, it'll give you cancer. I'm not worried about a little super glue. All I have to do is just a drop of super glue over the edge, let it dry. I want to make sure that there aren't any end checks, and if there are any end checks, because we've loaded a lot of heat and stress into here, it's completely gone. So I'm going to wait for this to dry. A little bit of moisture helps, or if this is a really acidic piece of wood, a little dusting of baking soda will set this off just like that. So I just have a piece of 120 grit sandpaper. Just sand it off smooth. That's all you need. Nothing fancy. Now I like to strike a center line, and then I'm going to put the taper into it, and then we're going to cut that down, and then we're going to more or less trim to the line and then use our hand planes to get to the proper width. Let's see, where did my ruler go? Oh, tomarigato. We're going to need that to strike our center line, but yeah, we're going to go something more our size. We have to take the center line here, and this is tick under 70 millimeters. That's 35, so 2 ticks under 35, because if we're 2 ticks under, then it'll be 35 right there. So I just make a little itty bitty line right there so you can see it, and that doesn't have to be precise. And over here, that's 68, so that's 34. So now that I've got those two, I take my ruler, make sure I line up my 2 lines so that the ruler doesn't move. It's one of my favorite things to do. I just take a quick center line. Now, this one is going to be a 51 millimeter nut. I like to have a little bit of extra space, so when I cut it, I'm going to cut it at 53, which I've got marked here, 53, and then I've got a center line struck on this, and all I have to do is visually center it up, and then pull it down, and a quick scribe, so that way I have my taper. Now that I've got my taper drawn onto here, I'm going to cut this at the bandsaw. I've marked the 12th fret, which I always like to do because that for me is where the body is. And because I'm going to be clamping it into this, I've marked the edges on both sides, so that way I can, if I need to, take a quick visual reference and strike a line here. But first things first, I have to smooth up this side, and as you can see, I didn't exactly catch the side with the joiner, which again, I don't mind at this point because we're still cleaning it up. So I'm just going to take that. I've got my Lee Nielsen number 5. This is one of my favorite planes. If you don't have one of these, don't worry, just use what you have. I've done this with a block plane, I've done it with a number 4, I've done it with a 62, I've done it with a whole bunch of stuff. Use what you got. I like this because it works well for me. So with this, you have to be very careful not to rock the blade one way or the other, and not to plane like this in an arc. So you have to start by pushing down, taking a cut, and then cycling off. It's a lot easier. Well, I've got this set up for a pretty heavy cut, so I'm actually going to back it out a little bit. That's better. So, as you can see, this is a very interlocked board. All those ripples are causing some tear out, which means that when I go to finish this out, I'm actually going to have to take some more time with the sanding. I'm not going to worry about this too much. So as you hear it squeak, you'd be tempted to put soap onto the bottom of your plane or anything like that. Yes, soap helps not squeak, but that also means that every single joint you do with that plane is going to be contaminated with soap or some kind of a lubricant. So I prefer having the noise rather than a contaminated glue joint or surface of my material. Alright, now we're going to take a quick measure, and that took me down to 53. So I just need to do about the same one more time, and then I'll be at 52, which means that I'll be able to finish the rest off through sanding. Alright, and there we are at 52, and the rest will come in at sanding. That's how I like to prep my fingerboard. After this, I'm going to put a little bit of a fill on both sides of this before I fit it, but I'll do that closer to when it's ready to go onto the guitar. But at this point, I like to know that my fingerboard is done, and I can start using this for reference if I need to. You know, coming over to my website, buying some merch, you know, use the promo code YouTube for $500 off your deposit. It really, really is helpful. I really enjoy doing these videos, so hopefully one day you'll see your guitar built on this channel as well. See you next time.